Okay, we are live. So this is our 28th or 28 444 call, now morphed into the full Dencun testing calls. Um, so there were a couple things people wanted to bring up today. So one, what we discussed on Encore Devs last week. So all the proposed changes to 4788. Um, and then the second big thing that came up was the issue around ETH68 interop and the encoding of the transaction type there. And I see Alex is not on the call, and so I don't know if we might want to wait for him to do the 4788 stuff. So instead, I guess we should probably start with the ETH68 issue, and then can do 4788 after. Oh, okay. So Alex can't make the call. Okay, let's just keep going with ETH68, and we can do 4788 after then. I know Andrew, you're the one who posted this on the agenda. So yeah, do you want to give some context on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think it was not me who discovered this problem, but I think it was Ethereum GS guys, and basically the problem is that how ETH68 is implemented in most clients, I think in all EL clients except for Ethereum JS, is not in line with the spec. But because and the difference is minor. It's how announcement types for different transaction types are encoded, and because the majority of the clients already implement it in one particular way, the same way Geth implements it, I just suggest to update the spec so we will minimize the necessary changes. It's probably the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, it is a bit weird though. Like the reason why I wouldn't say it's necessarily the best idea to update the spec to what it is now is that current encoding is kind of weird. I mean, it's basically an accident because in like the Go library for RLP, if you put like an array of bytes, it's gonna encode it as a byte array, like kind of expected. But then when you put any other kind of array, then it puts it as a like list, which is also expected. But it's kind of weird to have this, like to have the TX types as a byte array, because yeah, it's just not, I don't know, like what if there's ever going to be like, I mean, it's all hypothetical anyway. I don't really know.
It's maybe not the most elegant, but I think it just, if we do that, update the spec, then we just minimize the amount of busy work.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's true. The idea was kind of to like, I was kind of curious why in the first place it was decided to put these things in separate lists. I actually, and in the discussion, nobody really knows. Does anyone remember, to be honest?
I have a bit different thing to say, that we cannot really change ETH68 and implement it properly because this is already in production. This is already running, so we have to accept ETH68 as is, and we can only fix it in ETH69, for example.
Yeah. There's no plan right now to change the ETH68 anymore. Like it is what it is now. My question is more like, why was it already decided that, like, I mean, should we maybe like make another change for ETH69 first of all? Is anyone in favor of it?
No, because I think it's just unnecessary. We don't have a problem. Like the problem is that the problem can be easily addressed by changing the spec.
Yeah, I know. It looks pretty bad though. I mean, would it be okay for you guys if we basically leave it, but then when we make I will make a note, and then when we make the ETH69 for another reason, we will include this change as well. Like just improve this message somehow to like look better. Would you guys agree with that, or do you think that's like it should
That's
never
fair.
ever be changed again, or?
No, that's fair.
Okay, yeah, I can be okay with that as well. Change this back now, but then like leave it for next time to clean it up.
So I made a quick inquiry how we got to this point, and we haven't found it at the beginning. So we actually, I think, wanted to implement it correctly, but then the guys who were implementing, because it wasn't me actually, were confused by the Hive tests, which didn't work with the proper schema. So
Yeah.
it kind of like propagated from Geth, and that's not great.
Yeah, that's true. But like I said, I think even if somehow, I mean, the Hive tests are not based on Geth in the like regular way. It actually implements the protocol like by itself, but it also implements it incorrectly because, like I said, this mistake is really too easy to make and go because of this byte array thing. But my question was another one, which is like, if anyone maybe remembers why it was decided in ETH68. These announcements should contain these like 3 separate lists for the types, sizes, and hashes. It seems kind of counterintuitive. Maybe it would be better to somehow have it so that, I don't know, we have, for example, like triples in a list or something.
But then you would have encode each triple separately, right?
I don't know. I mean, it wouldn't. I don't think it would make any difference, to be honest. I mean, it was just kind of. I just found it curious that somehow it was decided to have these like 3 separate lists for the separate items. It's kind of an odd encoding, I feel. But I mean, at the same time, if you guys, I mean, nobody seems to have any issue with it. It was more like a question.
I remember the discussion, but I don't remember the exact thing.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Because I remember that I also like wasn't sure that this was the best idea to go with free lists.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like too bad, and
yeah, that seems to be how everyone feels about it. That's which I find kind of funny, to be honest. Like everyone I asked was like, "Yeah, you know, it's not the best, but it's also not the worst."
I think ask Marius, maybe he remembers.
Yeah. I think he's on vacation. But anyway, I mean, we can just leave it now. So I will I will basically make a note in this issue and in the dev.pwd repo that it's like for the next time, and I will change this back to have the byte array. It's weird, but we can accept it and move on, and then there will be the least amount of changes.
Oh, sorry, I was looking for your unmute button. And when you say leave it now, it's basically we do the change to the current ETH68 spec and as basically proposed, and then also move this change, also have this change as part of ETH69, correct?
Yeah, we will change something in ETH69, but it's not that important what it's going to be right now. Maybe we will go to the triples after all in the next version. Let's discuss it another time, and let's just like ship Cancun.
Okay. Are you able to make that spec change, Felix?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So, okay, we'll wait for your PR there. Thank you. Anything else on the ETH68 issue?
So this is going to be included not in Dencun. Did I understand it correctly? This is one after Dencun?
So ETH69 would be after Dencun, but we will make a fix so that all the clients basically have the same implementation for Cancun as part of the ETH68 spec. Does that make sense?
So that should come to DevNet 8 already?
Do we want to have that in? I guess do we?
Like ideally, we want to have everything in DevNet 8.
Okay.
That's what we've been saying in the past like 4 weeks now, but we just keep adding stuff to it. So that's why I'm just curious, what do we want? Because right now DevNet 7 is getting quite old and irrelevant. So it would be very good if we could launch this week, DevNet 8, even if, like.
Yeah, right. And then the question is though, this in a way is more like a bug or like a disagreement in implementations. Like some clients are going to have to change it regardless to communicate with other clients, right?
It mostly will be a no change because, like, I think all the EL clients except for Ethereum JS already implement like kind of the Geth flavor. So
okay,
from like in fact there will be no difference between DevNet 7 and DevNet 8, but formally we can count as a difference, as a kind of a change to the spec, which brings the spec in line with the reality actually.
Right. So Ethereum JS would have to make a change. Basically, that's the only one.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we should do that then. So let's mark it explicitly as included as part of DevNet 8, but in practice, the implementations won't have to do anything. Yeah, except Ethereum JS.
Yeah, just chiming in. We already have this change.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Sweet. Does that make sense to you, Barnabas, as well?
Yep.
Okay. Anything else on this? Okay, so next up, yeah, the last big thing and change to the spec is what we agreed to with regards to 4844. So not 4844, sorry, 4788 on Awkward Devs last week. So basically to move from using precompile for the EIP to using just a normal smart contract. And then the two biggest questions were which contract, how do we deploy the contract? Do we assume it's deployed prior to the fork, or do we have the deployment mechanism as part of the fork? And then what actual contract should we be using? Like client, you said you and Martin may have an update on one of those.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there's a PR to the 4788 spec. I'm not sure if people have had a chance to look at that. That was kind of the proposal based on what I understood we discussed from all core devs. And on those two questions about how to get the code there and what code to use, the answer that I used in the PR was we would deploy the contract before the fork once we agree on the bytecode, and then set in clients that address as the address to make the system call to. And the bytecode, I wrote an assembly implementation with some help from Martin and Joachim, and that's the proposed bytecode for 4788. It's got a get and set functionality where you can get the root based on timestamp, and then if you are calling as a system address, you can set the timestamp. So I guess there the main question is, how are we going to get the code there, and how are we going to update the roots? I know those are the two things that seem to be like debated right now.
Well, if I could just add, so there one more thing I think is being debated is whether to have ABI encoding on the user facing loading part. So there's the ABI encoding, yes or no, what deployment method to use, and then I think it was primarily Danny who raised the question, should we even have a path in the contract for the updating instead of, because the previous E version just did the update directly onto the storage of the contract. And yeah, I've already commented this on his comment. If we have the path in the contract, then it's still up to the client. The client implementer can still choose to do the update directly. If they want to do that optimization, that's fair game. They can do it. If you want to have a more simple client, you can just invoke a system call and let the EVM do what the EVM does. Yeah, so that's kind of the argument for doing it as a system call instead of mandating it as a direct update. That's all I had to add.
Anyone else? Yeah. Have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think regarding the ABI, if I remember correctly, for Gnosis chain and for Oro in general, we do use ABI. So it would be nice to also use ABI for consistency for this contract.
So what we're talking about here is the user-facing part. So when you want to get the beacon route, the original ETH just said that you send 256-bit integer to the precompile. None of the current precompilers have ABI for requesting data. Thus, they are a bit clumsy, and it's kind of hard to interact with most of them until the Solidity compiler gets native support for them. If they would have, or if this new one does support ABI encoding, then nothing needs to be added in the whatever compiler you want to use. You can just cast it to an ABI interface and then do like get beacon routes. And so I'm not talking about the system call here. I'm talking about the user call. So I just want to, for consistency, if we want to be consistent with previous precompilers, then we would say no ABI, because we don't do that for precompilers. But if we want to be more like acknowledging the de facto standard of data exchange between contracts in Ethereum, then we might want to go with ABI. That's kind of my impression.
Yeah, I guess my take is it feels like we're starting to blur the lines between the application layer and the core layer. So, yeah, right now, the way that we do ABI encoding is very ubiquitous, but I know there are other compilers that want to do things differently, and it just doesn't feel right to enshrine this behavior into a system contract. And also, this is not going to be a commonly used system contract. Like, I think mostly liquid staking tokens want to use this. So there's not going to be a huge rush of people doing the ugly raw call interpret as 32 bytes. So I don't think there's a lot of advantage of just making it work nicely with Solidity from day one.
Yeah, so me and Like5 have had this discussion a bit. I'm curious to hear what other people, how other people feel about it.
Yeah, I would currently be in favor of using the ABI, but I can also understand like client's comment about it.
Dano?
There's also what's going on is there's a read mode and a write mode going on in the same address. All the other all the other system contracts generally had one mode going. And we even split up I was able to get the BLS to split up into separate modes. So if there's multiple modes, either we need two contracts or we need some standard way to split between the modes. And that standard way is ABI.
I mean, I really don't think we should be... You're muffled, Martin?
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that in this particular case, we are splitting on the sender.
True, but that's still two modes. So you're splitting on the sender or you're splitting on the input data. There's modes, and yeah, I mean it's the same as changing the owner of a contract also splits on sender. You either revert or you actually change the sender.
So what is it? What do you think? I don't really understand what you're saying, Dana.
I prefer the ABI method because we're going to the direction that smart contracts are behaving like. So we should just embrace it and do the ABI.
Yeah, I'm also curious, what's the argument against using the ABI? Like, what's in your mind this is more for the like non-ABI camp, like in your mind, what's the thing that makes you not want it the most?
I think it's enshrining behavior that shouldn't be enshrined. There are other compilers who want to have different ways of calling functions. And I don't think that like forever in perpetuity, we should say that the way that Solidity chose a long time ago is the way to do it. This is a system contract, and we shouldn't be choosing standards like that.
Yeah, but then
Viper uses the ABI. Is it that Fee and some of the others don't?
I know Fee doesn't want to.
Yeah. Do we have other arguments against the ABI?
I mean, I think the ABI isn't good in the first place.
Okay.
Like.
Yeah. Okay. So these are the two things that you think is the most important. Is anyone else has any other?
It's also more expensive. Extra 4 bytes that aren't necessary because we're splitting on Cinder. So it's not really like semantically useful. The only advantage of the ABI is that it works out of the box with Solidity. And I don't think that's a good reason to make a change like this.
Okay, so it seems you feel very strongly about not using the ABI, and that's okay. Just wanted to know like what your thoughts are.
If I could just one more thing. So I agree that. So I think you said that it works out of the box with Solidity with ABI, and that's the only reason. But I have the counter argument to that is I found that it is very difficult to get it to work with Solidity if you don't have the ABI. I might be wrong, but you need to pass input and you need to make Solidity expect output. And maybe it's possible, but it's definitely not trivial, and it's kind of not nice to force people to go into assembly mode to interact.
You don't think you have to go into assembly, do you? I think you can just do a raw call to the address.
I think the output might, the fact that it returns data might be a bit problematic for the raw call.
You can cast it to bytes 32. It's not nice, but you should be able to do it without dropping it to assembly. You need to be able to tell the
compiler the size of the output. Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe not. I don't know sufficiently to really say.
Yeah, I'm also not sure. But I wrote some tests with it, and it wasn't terrible.
Tim is asking if we can add the ABI later. The answer is no.
Okay.
The ABI means that it has 36 bytes input. No ABI is 32.
Got it. Yeah, I don't know how we make that decision as.
I would wonder something. Do you guys think this contract will ever be extended in any way? I mean, I
don't think so.
Yeah, well, I mean, we always think that, but then in the next fork, it's like we want to add this field here that we just invented, and why not stuff it in the same? I mean, I've seen it before.
I mean, for sure. I guess this also kind of touches on the point of like how to get the code into the state, and I generally would rather we use the standard transaction deployment mechanism rather than doing a regular state transition to add it. if we do a regular state transition, then I think it's more likely that in the future we just modify the code. But if we deploy it as a transaction where it's just a regular part of the chain, I think it's less likely.
Well, I mean, we can't really upgrade it then, yeah. Well, I mean, we could always, but that's not true. I mean, this contract is kind of like, we could always, if we want to make a change to it, we could just create a new contract that is somehow better, and then basically make it invoke the old for any query that goes like beyond a certain block or something. Like, it would always be possible to change it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, just wanted to add, I realize that you're correct, like client, that now that we have return data, it's not such a big problem anymore. And I looked at this Solidity example, and it's not actually that painful to do a call, even if you don't have Solidity support. So I still prefer the ABI, but not as strongly.
So Proto has an idea of in the chat of having bindings for the contract that I guess would be a separate contract that we can just write and have anyone deploy if they want the ABI. Is that what you're saying, Proto? It's kind of like an ABI wrapper.
Yes, basically. So you could compare this to multi-call or some other popular permissionless contracts that do a thing for UX, do not really change the behavior of the virtual machine. So you could have a contract that does a delegate call into the pre-compile, or can we call it pre-deploy? Anyway, the special contract with the storage root. And provide the API that way.
Yeah, but it's like it's questionable if this is gonna be used then, because this will only serve to just drive up the gas cost for something that you can actually do way cheaper if you just call the real one. Like, this would just be like wasting gas for the code to look nice.
But then people can choose to do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, they could also just import like a Solidity library that makes it possible to call the contract in the normal way, like that it expects. I mean, if you're worried about the Solidity, there will always be this. It's not going to be that complicated to call it, so it's literally just going to be this like snippet that you can use.
Yeah, now that we have return, I mean, it was per month, but I forgot that we now have return data, so now it is actually not that difficult.
No.
So has anyone shifted their view thinking? And I guess the reason I ask is it would be valuable to agree on this sooner rather than later, because we're going to want to get the contract code audited. And obviously we want to get this implemented in DevNets, but we can change the specific contract a bit easier there.
Yeah, from my side, it's okay to drop the ABI.
Yeah, from my side too. It feels like the majority is mildly in favor of the ABI, and the way I like trying to strongly oppose. But I'm fine with dropping ABI.
Anyone else want to share their thoughts? Otherwise, yeah, I don't know. I would also lean to drop it, just also because of the fact that there can be a Solidity library to interact with it. There can be different contracts that interact with it. Oh, Dano, you just posted I in the chat.
Chris Sanders said a quote. I'll miss the API. I'd rather have it, but I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna be upset if it's not there.
Okay. Okay, so I'd say let's move forward without the ABI. And yeah, this way we can, once that PR is merged with the code, we can start getting auditors to look at it. I guess, like, Klein, do you feel like that the PR you wrote is like at that level? Like, this is the thing people should review as like the more or less final proposal?
Well, we've got the next problem to solve, which is how to get the code into the state.
Correct, but that's different than the code, right? So sorry, yeah, and I guess my question wasn't clear, but I guess just in terms of like finalizing the contract code.
Oh,
yeah.
Tim, are you talking about the code now, or were you talking about the EAP?
So I'm talking, if we want to audit that smart contract,
yeah,
do we feel comfortable that what's in like client's PR, once it's reviewed, we're happy to send out the auditors?
So I think we should give it a day more. We have some finalized, there's some maybe some comments about the stack, but basically it's finished. And it's a really trivial, simplistic contract. It has like 5 flows, 2 jumps or something like that, or 3. So it sounds like it's a big thing. We're gonna get it audited, but it's really not a big thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're quite confident about it.
Okay. That sounds good. And anyways, like, yeah, I agree. If we can merge it in the next couple of days, that's great. Mostly to move DevNet 8 forward. There's no auditor that's going to start working on something with a day's notice anyways. So, yeah, if we have this merge in the next couple of days and ready for DevNet 8, then we should be in a good spot to just get a sanity check from an external auditor as well. Okay, anything else on the contract itself? Then we can discuss the deployment.
Let's do deployment.
Okay, so yeah, other contentious issue. So do we deploy this with a singular, like a normal transaction, have the EIP assume that this is already on chain, and fail somewhere or another if it's not, or do we have the entire logic sort of part of the EIP, including the actual deployment of the contract? Yeah. Do people have strong opinions about this? Or I guess, okay, no one has a very strong opinion. Does someone want to make the case for deploying it in a just regular transaction?
Yes.
Oh, yes, please. And then Joachim, you can go after. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. So, oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, Martin, then Joachim.
Okay. I'll make the case then for deploying it in a regular transaction, because that's what I just think is the easiest from several perspectives. First of all, we could just deploy it now on mainnets, on all our testnets. We could do testing of it. It could be audited by whoever wants to look at it. And then months from now, we could just bless it to say, yeah, this is the contract. I just think it would be nice to do it that way.
Okay, Joachim?
Yeah, just as a note, if we deploy it as a normal transaction, then on our test nets, we will just have the case that we start without the contract, and we likely will immediately activate all the EIPs. And then at some point, we just deploy the transaction. So we might have a few blocks where this contract is not yet there. So this is another.
I thought that the DevOps team had said for the deposit contract, they have a way to work around this anyways.
Yeah, we just set it in Genesis.
Yeah.
We can set it in Genesis. You could also, and this is kind of cool, you could actually set another contract in Genesis, and you could set your allocation to do whatever you want. These specifications mandates that there's going to be a system call sending in the beacon route. If you're going to do some experimental private network where you do something else, you're free to do that.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay.
Would the address be the same across all contracts, or would we just accept what it does? I
No.
mean, we do a create to off of a known address.
So Tim asked if someone wants to make the case for a normal transaction. So for a normal transaction, the address would vary, and we would probably have to make sure that our chain specifications are flexible enough that you actually put an address in.
If we make it a create to off the same account, it should settle to the same address on all chains.
No,
but we got to get the create to contract out there, which
we need the
requires create. Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been really nice if we could achieve that, but I don't think we can.
But is it that important actually to have it the same?
Would just make it easy, because then we just have to activate it. Then we could hard code the address, and our chain config could just have a number or timestamp as usual, Cancun number, and not also have the Cancun beacon precompile address. It would simplify things.
Because that would beg the question, outside of testnets and mainnets, where is it going to be used? Is the not being able to lock in a number such a bad thing? Because if this is truly just being used in mainnet, then we lock the number into the Genesis, and any other alt chain or layer 2 wouldn't be using it anyway. So we're fine.
Yeah, it's definitely not required.
So one thing that they could do, and this is totally on a tangent, but if you're layer 2 or if you're some other network, you could actually use this and piggyback other features, because Ethereum mainnet has given you a system call to an address, and if you put something on an address and activate it, then you can have some kind of feature that you didn't have before. Where before block pro, you can implement things like deadman switches and whatever. But that's really beside the point. So that was a bit about doing it in a transaction. There are other ways to do it, and maybe someone else wants to make the case for those. I know Light Client, you wanted to do something else, right?
Yeah, I propose doing a synthetic transaction. I think that a synthetic transaction would give us a deterministic address across different chains. The only questionable part of it is making sure the fees work out where it gets included in all of the chains. If you're not familiar, this idea of a synthetic transaction is you kind of construct the transaction you want to deploy, and then you arbitrarily pick a VRS value, and then you recover the address from that. So the idea is you don't have the private key for that address. You just have this one-time transaction that's signed by that address. So we could publish that as part of the EIP, and then if somebody wants to deploy the system contract on another chain, they would just fund that account and then include that transaction on that chain.
Right.
But they also might get a different address unless they accept legacy addresses.
Yeah, they would have to use a pre-155 transaction. But for other chains, I think it's up to them to how they want to get this contract in. We're not requiring as part of the EIP. This is how you get this contract into the state. The EIP is more written that you, as a client, just make a system call to this address, and that can be configurable to the chain. And if they want to do in a regular state transition, if that's easier for them to do, they totally can do that.
It's so also maybe sorry.
Go ahead, Felix. Go ahead.
Just wanted to say, I think it's also maybe not required for all chains, because this is very specific to basically the mainnet at this point. Yeah. So I mean, even for example, in some testnets, we might not need this contract. It's not like always. Like what?
Yeah,
if
I
we
would
just
say it's important. Sorry, go ahead, Frodo.
I want to emphasize that the beacon block route is not just a layer 1 feature. Like, this is information that every layer 2, every chain would want to expose, just so that these protocols around the beacon chain, like LSTs, can interface with the state. Like it's very useful information to have, just like every layer 1 or every layer 2 exposes the layer 1 block root or the layer 1 block hash. The beacon chain information is just as useful.
Right. Maybe could you explain? I'm sorry, I don't want to drag out the call, but I'm really curious. How is the beacon block root going to be installed into the layer 2 chains? I mean, how is that going to
Different
be
layer
published?
2s have their own different system transaction options. Now, if I speak for Optimism as a protocol, there we have a system transaction that's a lot like a layer 1 to layer 2 deposit. It's an unsigned transaction. So that can insert things like this as any sender to any address if the hard fork defines this transaction to be inserted.
Right. But would you, for example, and then you would just basically include some kind of beacon root update as part of this operation, or?
We already exposed the rundown information in layer 2. We also do expose the layer 1 block header information. The beacon block root would also be like part of the set of information we would want to expose, and preferably just through the same standard interface, the same address, rather than having to reinvent the wheel and expose it with a layer 2 specific endpoint.
Okay, but that
For example,
might be
Arbitrum, Optimism, and other chains, they all expose the layer 1 block hash in different places, like different non-standard ways, because there's no such thing as a standard block hash contract.
Yeah. I mean, in that case, it might actually make sense to go for the ABI after all, because, I mean, it's easy for us to just say, this contract for the mainnet is only for this particular block beacon root. But for example, if it was based on ABI, then you could just put the beacon root in like another contract in your layer 2 and then have it as part of like some other interface or something, but it would still respond to the same selector. To the same 4-byte selector, but maybe in a different way or something. And this is not possible if you have a basic non-ABI contract, because then it can only ever respond with with one thing. So that might be a big reason to go with the ABI. I'm sorry to circle back to that, but maybe in another chain it will be more useful.
As a layer 2, we want to just stick as close to the layer 1 behavior as possible. If the EIP describes it as this is the layer 1 Ethereum mainnet beacon block root, and not specifically just the beacon block root of the local chain, then at least we can agree between all these chains that, hey, you're trying to source this information from mainnet. And if there is like the local chain to expose, maybe that needs to be part of the address, like maybe the chain ID is combined into the inputs that create the contract address. It doesn't have to be part of the API.
No. Yeah, but I mean something else. For example, in some future way, we might, for example, go ahead and start, I don't know, deploying a standard block hash contract or something. Yeah. And then that would require some kind of interface as well. And then at that point, it's going to be a bit silly, because in the layer 2s, there will be contracts already like having operations to get the block hash using ABI, and then we'll come along and we'll have to deploy a custom contract with a custom interface. And so we will never be able to agree with the layer 2s. So I was just trying to basically make a case that we should really reconsider this ABI thing, because just for the interoperability with the layer 2s, because they are using ABI for everything, and I think they might want to implement even this like beacon root with some kind of ABI based hook in their existing system contract or whatever. Yeah, anyway, sorry to derail again to the ABI, but
so we've covered 2 of the ways. The third way would be in the regular state transition at the fork block. And I know some people prefer that. I don't know if anyone is on the call who would like to make the case for that.
Okay, last call. There's some opposition in the comments.
So
So anyone want to? Oh, Danny and Alex are for the irregular state transition.
and Dan and Alex, neither of them are on the call.
Yeah.
They that was the path that they felt most comfortable with.
There's two sides to that. One is the philosophical argument that we don't want to do ETC stuff again. But I think the other side is that we're creating code that's going to be used once and disposed of. That's inherently fragile. So philosophically, I'm more on that camp, that I'd rather have just use a regular transaction if we don't care about the address. And that just feels cleaner and less code to write and less code to test.
Yeah, I agree. So one thing to say for doing an irregular state transition is that if we do that, we are at liberty to place it at, for example, OX F0 or something, or OX OB, which is the as if it were a precompile, or something closer to something to designate that this is a system contract and it's somehow magic. That is the biggest upside, I guess. And the other upside being that we are then fully in control of the deployment, and when Cancun hits, no matter what testnet or network you are on, we know that, bam, now these contracts exist and we are in charge.
So the argument is to go ahead, finish up.
No, to wrap up, I think those are the two upsides.
So if we're putting an OXB, but we're defining it in bytecode, we're still going into the EVM. So it's not truly like the other 9 precompiles we have where you never go into EVM code. This is specified in EVM.
It's not at all like a precompile. It's rather the opposite, because we actually do care about the code on it. But we could put it at, for example, OX F0 or something that's still designated as somewhat magical.
And then the Proto's point is like, it also avoids ever being on a network where the contract's not there.
Well, we could define the system contract, the system call step, to say if there's no code there, don't do it. If there's code there, make the call. So a call to a non-existing contract. So
I think that's kind of implicit. Like if the tree falls in the forest, because if we do a system call and nothing is there, then no one will ever know whether we did the system call or not, right?
Well, you're executing OXOO by definition, so.
Right. So it's, but yeah, it's opaque. It's not. It's a black box whether we did that virtual stop opcode or not.
Okay, and I wonder, like, is this something we need to decide in the next 8 minutes, or is this something that figuring out before the CL call does not introduce like extra delays? I assume that one, it feels like we do need time for the conversation, but I assume this is also a pretty big part of the implementation details, or is it not?
I mean, transaction versus irregular state transition, I think, is a relatively big part of the implementation detail.
Yeah. Do you feel like we can make this call now? And I guess part of the reason is like if we decide one way or another now, but then get on the ACD call this Thursday, and like people feel that like there's like a different consensus that forms, we've just like wasted everybody's time. starting to implement this. So I feel like the extra.
Is there,
Yeah. Sorry.
I was going to ask, is there anyone on this call who is strong, who feels strongly in any direction?
Oh,
one of the
Danny
three.
just showed up. Nice.
Yeah.
Danny, everyone, there's, I guess we've made cases for having this be deployed with a regular transaction, having it be deployed with a synthetic transaction, and yeah, we were now just talking about deploying it as part of the fork, but you're gone. Okay, let's give Danny another minute to rejoin. Oh, can you hear us now, Danny? Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Do you want to quickly argue for
Yeah. I'll just make the case.
Yeah.
I will preface it with it doesn't matter. It's more of kind of an aesthetic thing, obviously. But I think the aesthetics of having an EIP that is self-contained and has no like weird external human dependency to deploy is like natural and good and better than the alternative that has the like, okay, well, submit a transaction and set this configuration variable or whatever method is being done, and having contingencies for if somebody doesn't do that, and then having people to have to think about it in DevOps configurations or having to think about it when deploying in another environment. It's just like this this seems like a system operation that exists at a system address specified, which can be specified in code, or as we had it before, it could be specified in logic that's implemented. Specifying an EVM code doesn't all of a sudden make it like a dangerous irregular state transition. It's literally just system code living at a system address, and like conflating it with the notion of an irregular state change, I think is just kind of like a weird, inaccurate, politically charged way to describe this thing. So again, like, it doesn't matter. It's EVM code. It's going to live somewhere. It's going to be deployed either out the fork or before, because we're going to make sure it is on mainnet. But I just think it's really nice and self-contained to be like, here's the bytecode at the fork deploys the bytecode. It lives exactly where we want it to live, and we move on with our lives instead of having like an external dependency. I think it's just nice to have it all wrapped up in a bow. But I'm not going to die on this hill. I'd like to just see this operation deployed. So if people have strong opinions and are unwilling to budge in my direction, that's fine.
Maybe something to consider is that if you put it as part of a sort of like, if you just deploy it by the fork, then this will also mean that there will be no variance, like no possible variance across chains for this contract. Whereas what we were discussing earlier is also a little bit this possibility that maybe on some other chains, they might want to expose like a different kind of system contract with like different functionality or something.
Right. But that doesn't seem to preclude like that. That seems like an independent issue. You have a configuration variable that says this system operation goes at this address. And if you want to configure that to a different address in a different chain, it's just changing a configuration variable. Or if you want to deploy code, you just change that variable as well, which is the code variable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Look, I'm the EVM is my friend, but not my intimate domain. I don't need to make this decision.
Yeah, and I guess the question we had before you hopped on is, do we need to make this decision now, basically the next couple minutes, or should we take a couple days to have people review it and think through it, and at the latest do it this Thursday? And does that slow down implementations from client teams significantly?
So that particular decision, it does affect how the EAP is written, and it does affect the implementation of in the clients.
Yeah. And I guess maybe,
I mean, it's not a huge thing, but it does add a bit of time, yes.
Yeah.
If we decide on Thursday, I mean, we're obviously not going to decide it in the next 45 seconds.
Yeah.
So,
Barnabas?
Is it something that maybe we should leave out of DevNet 8? I know I've been pushing to include everything as much as possible in DevNet 8, but at this point, we have DevNet 7, which is using some very stale branches of clients, and we would like to have a new DevNet up and running that would be running the client's latest code, so they can also check everything that they wrote since, I don't know, it's been almost a month. So.
But do all the clients have an implementation? Would that mean we use the precompile for 788 for DevNet 8? Do all clients have an implementation of that?
Baysu does not.
Okay.
Geth has one which contains a flaw.
Okay. So, and Daniel, was that why you had your hand up?
No, I was going to say a different counterpoint to one of the arguments for having it as a state transition is that's going to be less work for DevOps, but we're just shifting the work from DevOps to client devs to write single-use code for single transition. So at some point, we're just moving the work around. It's not going to save work.
Yeah, agreed. My point would be that it becomes something that is just part of client logic if the feature is enabled, rather than something that tooling, other chains, etc., have to make sure that they're thinking about. But you're right, it emerges some.
Yeah, and Proto has an interesting suggestion. Like, do we just maybe skip the deployment part of the EIP, put the contract in an address at Genesis for DevNet 8, and use this for DevNet 8, give ourselves another at least 3 days, maybe a bit more, to figure out the right long-term approach, and use that for DevNet 9? Would that work?
That would be actually kind of smart. If we don't, then we don't have to. Yeah, we just put it in the alloc, the Genesis alloc.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's something that doesn't work for Minute, but it works perfectly for a testnet.
In that case, Barnabas or Perry, can either of you just basically make that part of the DevNet 8 Genesis file and like share the address with clients? Okay, and then use that for Hive as well?
Probably also for Hive, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Light client can give you the code in like the next 24 hours or something.
Yeah, that sounds good. We just want all the clients still to play as Hive test, and it would be good to have that before we launch any DevNet 8.
Okay, so just to summarize before we quit, so we agreed to not use the ABI for now. We agreed to, like clients, we don't have time, I think, to talk about system calls. Anyways, wait, let's just recap where we're at. But okay, no ABI for now. We're going to have the contract as part of the Genesis file, use the same address as the precompile did, 0xb. And then, okay, if you want to talk about system calls, we can do it in a minute, client. Oh, are you still here? Oh,
yeah,
yes.
I think the last question was, do we want to have the functionality in the bytecode to set the relevant storage values so that before the block happens, you actually call the EVM? Or did we want to not have that functionality in the bytecode at all and just in the EIP say clients will update these storage values?
Right now it's written with the kind of conditional routing for the set, as well as a note that clients could just update storage values if they felt like it, right?
Yep.
It seems fine.
Okay. Anything else before we wrap up? Okay, sweet. Thanks everyone. Yeah. Yeah, talk to you all on the ACD call Thursday.
Thanks.
I guess.
Bye bye.
See ya.